Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and today we'll be reading more Ideas and Opinions by Albert Einstein. We are reading part two of a piece that was exchange of letters with members of the Russian Academy. Today we're reading Einstein's reply, which is one, two, three, four, five, about a little over 6 pages. So bear with me. Let's do this. Four of my Russian colleagues have published a benevolent attack upon me in an open letter carried by the New Times. I appreciate the effort they have made, and I appreciate even more the fact that they have expressed their point of view so candidly and straightforwardly. To act intelligently in human affairs is only possible if an attempt is made to understand the thoughts, motives, and apprehensions of one's opponent so fully that one can see the world through his eyes. All well-meaning people should try to contribute as much as possible to improving the mutual understanding. It is in that spirit that I should like to ask my Russian colleagues and any other reader to accept the following answer to their letter. It is the reply of a man who anxiously tries to find a feasible solution without having uh, the, the illusion that he himself knows the truth or the right path to follow. If in the following I shall express my views somewhat dogmatically, I do it only for the sake of clarity and simplicity. Although your letter in the main is clothed in an attack upon the non-socialistic foreign countries, particularly the United States, I believe that behind the aggressive front there lies a defensive mental attitude, which is nothing else but the trend toward an almost unlimited isolationism. The escape into isolationism is not difficult to understand if one realizes that what Russia has suffered at the hands of foreign countries during the last 3 decades. The German invasions with planned mass murder of the civilian population, foreign interventions during the Civil War, the systematic campaign of calumnies in the Western press, the support of Hitler as an alleged tool to fight Russia. However understandable this desire for isolation may be, it remains no less disastrous to Russia and to all nations. I shall say more about it later on. The chief object of your attack against me concerns my support of world government. I should like to discuss this important problem only after having said a few words about the antagonism between socialism and capitalism. For your attitude on the significance of this antagonism seems to dominate completely your views of international problems. If the social economic problem is considered objectively, it appears as follows. Technological development has led to increasing centralization of the economic mechanism. It is this development which is also responsible for the fact that economic power is all widely industrialized countries has become concentrated in the hands of relatively few. These people in capitalist countries do not need to account for their actions to the public as a whole. They must do so in socialist countries in which they are civil servants, similar to those who exercise political power. I share your view that a socialist economy possesses advantages which definitely counterbalance its disadvantages whenever the management lives up, at least to some extent, to adequate standards. No doubt the day will come when all nations, as far as such nations still exist, will be grateful to Russia for having demonstrated for the first time, by vigorous action, the practical possibility of planned economy in spite of exceedingly great difficulties. I also believe that capitalism, or we should say the systems of free enterprise, will prove unable to check unemployment, which will become increasingly chronic because of technological progress, and unable to maintain a healthy balance between production and the purchasing power of the people. On the other hand, we should not make the mistake or of blaming capitalism for all existing social and political evils, and of assuming that the very establishment of socialism would be able to cure all the social and political ills of humanity. The danger of such a belief lies first in the fact that it encourages fanatical intolerance on the part of all the faithful by making a possible social method into a type of church which brands all those who do not belong to it as traitors or as nasty evildoers. Once this stage has been reached, the ability to understand the convictions and actions of the unfaithful vanishes completely. You know, I am aware from history how much unnecessary suffering such rigid beliefs have inflicted upon mankind. Our government is in itself an evil insofar as it carries within it the tendency to deteriorate into tyranny. However, except for a very small number of anarchists, every one of us is convinced that civilized society cannot exist without a government. In a healthy nation, there is a kind of dynamic balance between the will of the people and the government, which prevents the degeneration into tyranny. It is obvious that the danger of such deterioration is more acute in a country in which the government has authority not only over the armed forces, but also over all the channels of education and information as well as over the economic existence of every single citizen. I say this merely to indicate that socialism, as such, cannot be considered the solution to all social problems, but merely as a framework within which such a solution is possible. What has surprised me most in your general attitude expressed in your letter is the following aspect. You are such passionate opponents of anarchy in the economic sphere, and yet equally passionate advocates of anarchy, e.g., unlimited sovereignty in the sphere of international politics. The proposition to curtail the sovereignty of individual states appears to you in itself reprehensible as a kind of violation of a natural right. In addition, you try to prove that behind the idea of curtailing sovereignty, the United States is hiding her intention of economic domination and exploitation of the rest of the world without going to war. That attempt to justify this indictment by analyzing in your fashion the individual actions of this government since the end of the last war. You attempt to show that the Assembly of the United Nations is a mere puppet show controlled by the United States, and hence American capitalism. Such arguments impress me as a kind of mythology. They are not convincing. They make obvious, however, the deep estrangement among the intellectuals of our two countries, which is the result of a regrettable and artificial mutual isolation. If a free personal exchange of views should be made possible and should be encouraged, the intellectuals, possibly more than anyone else, could help to create the atmosphere of mutual understanding between the two nations and their problems. Such an atmosphere is a necessary prerequisite for the fruitful development of political cooperation. However, since for the time being we depend upon the cumbersome method of open letters, I shall want to indicate briefly my reaction to your arguments. Nobody would want to deny that the influence of the economic oligarchy upon all branches of our public life is very powerful. This influence, however, should not be overrepresented or overestimated. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected president in spite of desperate opposition by those very groups and was reelected 3 times. And this took place at a time when decisions of great consequence had to be made concerning the policies of the American government since the end of the war. I am neither willing nor able nor entitled to justify or explain them. It cannot be denied, however, that the suggestions of the American government with regard to atomic weapons represented at least an attempt toward the creation of a supranational security organization. If they were not acceptable, they could at least have served as a basis of discussion for a real solution of the problems of international security. It is indeed the attitude of the Soviet government that was partly negative and partly dilatory, which has made it so difficult for well meaning people in this country to use their political influence as they would have wanted and to oppose the warmongers. With regard to the influence of the United States upon the United Nations Assembly, I wish to say that, in my opinion, it stems not only from the economic and military power of the United States, but also from the efforts of the United States and the United Nations to lead toward a genuine solution of the security problem. Concerning the controversial veto power, I believe that the efforts to eliminate it or make it ineffective have their primary cause less in specific intentions of the United States than in the manner in which veto privilege has been abused. Let me come now to your suggestion that the policy of the United States seeks to obtain economic domination and exploitation of other nations. It is a precarious undertaking to say anything reliable about aims and intentions. Let us rather examine the objective factors involved. The United States is fortunate in producing all the important industrial products and foods in her own country in sufficient quantities. The country also possesses almost all important raw materials. Because of her tenacious belief in free enterprise, she cannot succeed in keeping the purchasing power of the people in balance with the productive capacity of the country. For these very same reasons, there is a constant danger that unemployment will reach threatening dimensions. Because of these circumstances, the United States is compelled to emphasize her export trade. Without it, she could not permanently keep her total productive machinery fully utilized. These conditions would not be harmful if the exports were balanced by imports of about the same value. Exploitation of foreign nations would then consist in the fact that the labor value of exports would considerably exceed that of imports. However, every effort is being made to avoid this, since almost every import would make a part of the productive machinery idle. This is why foreign countries are not able to pay for the export commodities of the United States, payment which, in the long run, would indeed be possible only through imports by the latter. This explains why a large portion of all the gold has come to the United States. On the whole, this gold cannot be utilized except for the purchase of foreign commodities, which, because of the reasons already stated, is not practicable. There it lies, this gold, carefully protected against theft, a monument to governmental wisdom and to economic silence. The reasons which I have just indicated make it difficult for me to take the alleged exploitation of the world by the United States very seriously. However, the situation just described has a serious political facet. The United States, for the reasons indicated, is compelled to ship part of its production to foreign countries. These exports are financed through loans which the United States is granting foreign countries. It is indeed difficult to imagine how these loans will ever be repaid. For all practical purposes, therefore, these loans must be considered gifts which may be used as weapons in the arena of power politics. In view of the existing conditions and in view of the general characteristics of human beings, this, I frankly admit, represents a real danger. It is not true, however, that we have stumbled into a state of international affairs which tends to make every invention of our minds and every material good into a weapon, and consequently into a danger for mankind. This question brings us to the most important matter uh, in comparison to which everything else appears insignificant indeed. We all know that power politics, sooner or later, necessarily leads to war, and that war, under present circumstances, would mean a mass destruction of human beings and material goods, the dimensions of which are much, much greater than anything that has ever happened in history. Is it really unavoidable that because of our passions and our inherited customs, we should be condemned to annihilate each other so thoroughly that nothing would be left over which would deserve to be conserved? Is it not true that all the controversies and differences of opinion which we have touched upon in our strange exchange of letters are insignificant pettinesses compared to the danger in which we all find ourselves? Should we not do everything in our power to eliminate the danger which threatens all nations alike if we hold fast to the concept and practice of unlimited sovereignty of nations? It only means that each country reserves the right of for itself of pursuing its objectives through warlike means. Under the circumstances, every nation must be prepared for that possibility. This means it must try with all its might to be superior to anyone else. This objective will dominate more and more our entire public life and will poison our youth long before the catastrophe is itself actually upon us. We must not tolerate this. However, as long as we still retain a tiny bit of calm reasoning and human feelings, this alone is on my mind in supporting the idea of a world government, without any regard to what other people may have in mind when working for the same objective. I advocate world government because I am convinced that there is no other possible way of eliminating the most terrible danger in which man has ever found himself. The objective of avoiding total destruction must have priority over any other objective. I am sure you are convinced that this letter is written with all the seriousness and honesty at my commands. I trust you will accept it in the same spirit. So, yeah, Einstein responding, saying, look, it is not an attack on you to want a world government. I just fear that with the history of man, the history of nations, there will always be conflicts and differences that will be used to attack each other. And this time, if there's a war, we risk the worst devastation there has ever been. So, yeah. And he explains he thinks both economic styles are dangerous because they do have drawbacks, which personally I do agree. Both have drawbacks. Myself, I've said we need a combination to reach a zenith. But anyway, that will be it for this video. It's already almost half an hour. As always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tries to tell you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll see you all in the next video. Until then, later.